Steelers Bengals, another Week 1 divisional matchup. Your defending Super Bowl runner-up versus a team going through obviously a big change at quarterback. So lots of stuff to talk about. This Steelers offense, right? You do have some new faces. Obviously, Mitch Trubisky coming over to be your post Ben Roethlisberger franchise quarterback. You signed James Daniels to be a starting tackle. George Pickens, I only thought of rookie. And for this Bengals defense, really, really similar faces to last year. In fact, everyone who's a starter was here last year. Almost everyone that's on this page is here last year, except for Jay Tufele. They did perform pretty well, though, and we'll talk about what they look like going forward if they can keep up that level of performance. So, first, Steelers offense, Bengals defense, can they run the ball? That's why I always get it out of the way. Less important the two phases of the offense, quicker to talk about. So, the Steelers have been notoriously bad at running the football for quite a while. Their production ends up getting there sometimes because they've had really good running backs and because they insist on doing it over and over again. And sometimes they run into teams where it works. But the reason they struggled so much in that aspect and why, especially the last few years, the run game has especially been just constant screens and short throws from Ben Roethlisberger is because they do go after a certain type of offensive lineman, and that's still more or less the case on this team. Dan Moore and Chukwuma Okorafor, where I do like both of them in aspects of their game for sure, as run blockers, especially downhill guys, definitely not there. James Daniels is a little bit of an upgrade over what they've had. Not an incredible player, but decent. I do like the Kevin Dotson pick a lot, and now I am shocked that Mason Cole is starting for this team. It makes sense based on what they value in center, I guess, but he's just a bad player, so that is a concern. But overall, the point is this offensive line's still pretty bad at run blocking, and they are facing a front four who is really, really good in that area. DJ Reader is a dominant force in the run game as a defensive tackle, incredibly good player. BJ Hill can be on the field. He's decent. Jates Phil, I did show a little bit with the Jags last year. Trey Hendrickson, one of the better run defending edges in the league. Sam Hubbard, same. Those guys they're just not going to get pushed out of their gaps, especially in this game. They're all athletic enough to make plays, shed blocks, and as the Steelers have gotten so used to over the last few years, we're still talking about a team that just can't run the ball. Now, I will say, too, the linebacker, I was worried about the Bengals defense a little bit last year because I thought their linebackers were going to be really bad. That did not end up being the case. Logan Wilson performed way, way better than I expected from him. And Jermaine Pratt a little bit, too. I thought he was okay, but I'm still worried about them going forward. I'm not convinced that their standard of performance is quite what it was last year very consistently. But there's something to be said. I can be wrong, obviously, as well. So they are better than I thought. So point is, Steelers really can't run the ball. Also, between Mike Hilton, Von Bell, and Jesse Bates, Bengals kill stuff from the run game from the secondary. So can they throw the ball and make up for it? Well, really hard to do that when your first point of attack is that you have Mitch Trubisky as your quarterback. Don't get fooled by off-season hype or by the money given to him or anything like that. Mitch Trubisky is bad at football. He's just can't consistently make correct decisions. You will see worse throws out of him as far as what the fuck are you doing? Why are you throwing directly at a defender? You'll see more of those than you will see out of just about any other quarterback in the entirety of the league, except for maybe Jameis Winston. He just cannot consistently perform, and it's not going to change. I've little to no doubt about that. He does occasionally do some vaguely useful stuff. He does have reasonable athleticism outside of the pocket. If he's left back there completely clean, he occasionally will find open receivers, but it's tough. So you really need a good offensive environment. Does that exist in this game? No, not really. There is pass rush from, like I said, DJ Reader up the middle, especially through Mason Cole, who's just an absolute pushover to anybody with play strength, which DJ Reader has in tons. James Daniels not a perfect pass protector, and their tackles, while they're pretty good as pass pro, especially like Okorafor, Trey Hendrickson did also kind of prove me wrong last year. He was better than I thought he was going to be after he left the Saints. Is a reasonable pass rusher. Sam Hubbard can get some work done. Cam Sample even showed a little bit. So while I don't love those guys in general or as a whole, in this game, I do think there's enough that they're going to push the pocket a little bit, although I will say it's nothing crazy, so Mitch Trubisky does have a chance in a clean pocket a little bit. So then are the receivers going to win? Well, Deontay Johnson should play in this game. There's some concern about his health. If he plays, he's just a really good receiver. He's constantly open, basically, regardless of circumstance. Now, it is mostly limited to near the line of scrimmage, but a lot of that has been because of the way Ben Roethlisberger has run the offense. He is good as you get down the field, so he's just a really, really good player. And for as much as I like the Bengals secondary, Eli Apple and Chidobe Awuzie, both good players that really proved me right a lot of ways last season, and Mike Hilton, of course, everybody knows is really good. None of them are like shutdown players, so Deontay Johnson's just too good to be held down by any of them. The other weapons, though, do worry me. Chase Claypool struggles to get open even against bad corners a lot of times, and that doesn't apply here. I expect him to really be kept in somebody's pocket most of the game. Now, he does still have a chance in screen game after the catch stuff, and just through basic scheme. Not everybody's covered within an inch every play of every game. He can still be okay, but I don't particularly like him as a player, so that is a little bit of a struggle. And then George Pickens, the Steelers like him a lot, and the Steelers are really good at finding good receivers, but until I see it on the field, I'm not going to assume a lot. So there's not really a ton of winning on the outside for the Steelers, but Deontay Johnson, like I said, he's an offensive driver, and those other guys I don't want to be overly negative about. They can at least be reasonable in this game. Then you do have Najee Harris out of the backfield, who's pretty damn good at that. Pat Freiermuth is actually a good tight end himself. And while the Bengals matchup weapons, especially Von Bell and even Mike Hilton, they'll put on tight ends and stuff, are good, they're not incredible. So overall, I do think the Steelers have a little bit of a chance to move the ball. I'm not going to really be too positive about any team with Mitch Trubisky at quarterback, obviously, but it's not hopeless, especially when I do think, like I said before, that the offensive line is going to hold up to a reasonable degree. So I have them at 10 to 17 points. Still not very much. It's just really tough. It's just really, really tough with Trubisky. But I'll give credit to Deontay Johnson, to Mike Tomlin, and to Najee Harris to at least get a little bit done. So is that enough to keep up with this Bengals offense? Well, this Bengals offense was pretty up and down last year. There were times they looked really good. They obviously had a ton of super explosive plays, but they had times they could get really bogged down too. They still had tremendous struggles with some really bad offensive linemen. For as good as their receivers are, they aren't quite at that like top tier in the NFL. So good secondaries can still hold them a little bit. And Joe Burrow, as much as I do like him and do think he's better than I originally thought he was, still isn't in that top 3, 4, 5, of quarterbacks who just, no matter the circumstance, are going to be really good. So what does it look like this year? Well, I do like a lot of stuff that they've done, especially in the offensive line. They have a fairly high pick in Cordell Volson. Looks like he's going to start at guard. Alex Kappa comes over from the Buccaneers. I don't actually like that a ton, to be honest with you, but hold up one second. Is it paused? They did change out a starter, now fixed at center, and Ted Karras for Trey Hopkins. And they bring over La'el Collins, a crazy talented player who, as recently as like 3 years ago, was one of the 5, 6 best tackles in football, which I like a lot. So they're trying at least. Now, I do have, Ted Karras is really just meh at best. He functions well on a good offensive line as a whole, which this team actually has a chance at now. Alex Kappa, like I said, he really is not nearly as good as people I think he is, because he played around such incredibly good players in the Buccaneers. But he's not horrible. He can do a little bit of work in the run game especially. And then, like I said, La'el Collins, he's dealing with a lot of injuries, just weird personal stuff I think going on with the Cowboys the last few years. But if he's healthy, the dude is unbelievably talented and could be the best offensive lineman the Bengals have had since Andrew Whitworth. So, overall, like I said, they're trying and they're doing a better job than they have been for a long time with it. And then, of course, you still have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. They're all really pretty good. Jamar Chase is incredible. Huge fan of him. Obviously, not a ton that I need to say about that. He's a good enough player to be just about anybody. Well, he's not exactly the type of receiver I normally reserve for the elites here in the NFL. He clearly makes up for that as far as somebody who's like incredibly quick and getting open every play. He gets open in other ways with his route running, with his strength, and he's still quick and fast too. Like, he's just really good. Obviously, T. Higgins, really good, a very similar player actually. And Tyler Boyd, I think, was produced a lot because he was heavily targeted in a scheme that catered to him. Whatever, he's still a useful slot player, especially into teams that don't have particularly good slot corners. So there's a reason this offense can be so explosive, and a lot of it comes down to those receivers and, of course, Joe Burrow. This Steelers defense, though, man, don't forget that this Steelers defense has been really good for a really long time, and they've done almost nothing but improve this offseason. There's one spot I'm worried about, but overall, I mean, you're talking about bringing in Larry Ogunjobi, pretty damn talented defensive tackle, high pick into Marvin Leal. You get Tyson Alualu back from injury. You bring Miles Jack in from the Jaguars, who's one of the best linebackers in the league. There's still a ton of talent, especially in the front seven of this team. You also bring in Levi Wallace, who I like quite a bit as a corner. And while the rest of their corners do concern me, the way that they play defense is so light on, they don't ask their corners to man cover guys in islands almost ever. You can get away with that type of stuff. So how does this matchup look like specifically this year? Well, for the Bengals, honestly, I'm a little bit worried. So first, as far as running the ball goes, I don't think they're really going to be able to. Volson as a rookie, maybe he does step in and be pretty good right away, but especially in the first game, like I always say, rookie's probably not going to be very good. Alex Kappa is going to really, really, really struggle with Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, and Tyson Alualu. Bad. Ted Karras, like I said, well, he's pretty mid and okay in some situations. He's not good enough to keep up here. And with TJ Watt on the edge, he's just such an unbelievably dominant force regardless of circumstance, that it's tough to really see them getting any traction. They don't do any particularly smart stuff as far as getting, Joe Mixon or whatever into really positive space as opposed to other teams. And so I'm worried about them being able to run the ball, which means a lot of this comes down to Joe Burrow throwing. Can he do that in this game? Well, again, I'm actually fairly worried about it. I don't think Joe Burrow functions that well into these unique zone blitz defenses that the Steelers and Ravens have. Now, they did blow out the Steelers one time last year, but if you really look at that game, there was some pretty unique circumstances around just huge plays on, not going to say luck, but on not high percentage situations, turnovers, stuff like that. So I'm not, going to go ahead and say that he can do that consistently every time. In fact, I'd bet against it. He is good still. He does take positive. He puts the ball into positive places, and he is good enough to get it out quickly into positive situations. I'm not terrified of it, but there's real pass rush in the game. Like I said, the interior of the Bengals offensive line cannot handle the Steelers front three. TJ Watt is just too good for everybody, and that includes Jonah Williams and probably La'el Collins, and Alex Highsmith and or Malik Reed they get from the Broncos are good enough as fourth option pass rushers on the Steelers that I'm scared for Joe Burrow kind of running for his life again back to his rookie year in this game specifically. And while, yes, the Bengals receivers are way better than the Steelers corners, Levi Wallace is actually a pretty capable player, especially in a scheme like this. He's become, he's played a lot of soft zone type stuff with the Bills for a long time. Cam Sutton was pretty good last year. Finally putting it together as a former third-round pick. James Pierre, Arthur Mollett, both players who I think can exist on an NFL field and not get screwed, especially with the experience they have in this scheme like I keep talking about. So the Bengals can't quite exercise the advantage they have at receiver in the same way they do against other teams because the Steelers aren't asking their corners to cover these guys man on man most of the time. So I do like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins enough to say they will provide a little bit of a baseline of success. But with the pass rush, with the Steelers' ability to react overall, and with Joe Burrow, I think still being a little bit shaky against this type of defense, I only put the Bengals about 17 to 24 points. So I will give them respect. Their receivers are so good and everything, but their offense, their final numbers in a lot of these games last year weren't quite as explosive as I think a lot of people think that they were. And there are still real issues with this offense as a whole going forward. So I do still think the Bengals are going to win this game. They're just a much better team. One team has Joe Burrow at quarterback. One team has Mitch Trubisky. It doesn't really a lot of time go much further than that. But as far as the betting goes, I still actually like quite a bit the Pittsburgh plus 6.5, just because when I expect to be quite a low-scoring game, 6.5, that's a big number in an NFL game, especially for a team with a defense as good as the Steelers have. I do still think pretty comfortably, I said that the Bengals will be the one that ends up winning. And for the over-under, I do like under 44.5. Mitch Trubisky could throw like 6 interceptions and give so many short fields that the Bengals run that number up pretty quick. That scares me a little bit. But other than that, I mean, that's obviously pretty unlikely. So I do like all three of these numbers for what they are in betting. But, yeah, Bengals win.